Hi everybody, and welcome to our unit on the basics of photojournalism. Today we're going to cover in our presentation the rules of composition for taking photographs. We're actually going to start with a quote that we'll later contradict, but it's a great way to kind of start. Ansel Adams, a famous photographer, said, "There are no rules for good photographs, there are only good photographs." But here we are talking about the rules of composition, so thought I'd start with a little twist and a little irony. So as an introduction, pose a question that it's just take a pause and have a wondering. Have you ever wondered why some photos are just better than others? I'm going to put a couple examples up here on the screen. Very striking, very beautiful photographs. So what is it about some photos that are just that much better than other photos? And again, to contradict Ansel Adams, there are a few rules that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to ask you to strive to follow as you head out there and become journalistic photographers. Rules are simplicity, leading with lines, the rule of thirds, framing, mergers, and considering the point of view when you take the picture. And what we're going to do in this presentation today is go through each one of these rules of photography one by one, talk about what it means, how you would use it out in the field, and then show you a couple examples. So let's start with simplicity. First, and perhaps the most important guideline of taking photos is simplicity. What you're doing is you're looking for ways to give the center of interest in your picture the most visual attention. And one way is to really make sure you're not complicating things. Look for an uncomplicated background that doesn't steal attention away from your subject. So let's take a look at this example. All right. If we look at this picture, you might wonder, well, what's the focus here? We're taking a picture of the telephone, or we're taking a picture of the bridge, we're taking a picture of the cactus, or the plant next to the cactus even. There's a lot going on there. What are we taking pictures of? And so what we want to do is let's think about, can we improve this photo by looking for visual simplicity? And so one of the things you really need to be thinking about is, what do you want to be your center of interest? So again, now on the second screen, we've got two things going on there. So I lost my picture. Here was our original photo. And what we did is we chose the cactus as the main background. We took away anything that might be complicating the view of that cactus. And now we have a little bit more of a dynamic picture. We've made simplicity our goal in that photo. So what you're thinking about is, when you compose your picture through your viewfinder, make sure the reason you're taking that picture is clear. And again, here's another good example. Are we taking a picture of the cars? Are we taking a picture of the church or the monastery in the background? Are we taking a picture of the greenery around it? What are we taking a picture of? So let's take that versus that one. And most of us, I think, prefer the picture on the right, because the parking lot with these really dated cars tends to contradict this antiquity feeling that you get from the mission. There's just a little bit too much going on in the picture, and it's distracting. But if we simplify it by focusing just on the mission, because we know that's our center of interest, it makes a big difference. Okay, second rule of composition, leading with lines. This one you won't necessarily be able to use all the time, but when you can find it, you often hit it out of the park. So the concept behind it is that linear elements, especially when they're on the diagonal, are often very dynamic in an image. You can use diagonals as leading lines to provide a way into the picture. Often what we're providing for the viewer of the picture is a pathway for the eye to lead towards the main subject. It's a good example, and the fence line is our leading line, or the path can also be our leading line. I think the fence is the one your eye goes to first. Think about what your eye went to first. I'm going to bring another picture up and think about what your eye is going to first. Okay? The little boy wearing red is probably just an immediate, your eye is drawn to that, but the lines leading to him make it such a more dynamic picture versus if you were just sitting on a plain backdrop. Okay, next rule of composition, the rule of thirds. Cameras today make this one a little bit easier of a rule to follow. Let me give you the background or the idea behind it. The rule of thirds the idea is that you can use this as a guide to off-center placement of your subject. Again, our eyes are often drawn to something that is just not quite dead center, but a little bit off. Think about that boy in that picture sitting on the stairs. He was just kind of a little bit off-center. So before you snap a picture, you can imagine that your viewfinder is divided into thirds, both horizontally and vertically. And I said that cameras are making this easier nowadays because sometimes they actually will put sort of a grid box on as you're looking through the viewfinder, and you can move your camera or move yourself as needed to place your object right on the point. So the intersection of those lines are your 4 good options for placing that center of interest. Okay. Let's again look at some examples. So this is what we're talking about that grid line, and these points that you see are the 4 points for placing your center of interest. And there's a simple example. And we're going to look at one more because what we want to think about is like, okay, well, which of the 4 points do I choose, right? Well, one of the things you want to think about is consider the path of your moving subject. So if like in this case, this person is walking, what you want to do is generally leave space for them to move into the frame, as opposed to them needing only to take one more step and all of a sudden they're out of the frame completely. Next rule of composition is framing. So the idea behind this one is that you want to frame your center of interest, and we keep coming back to this phrase center of interest that we established when we talk about simplicity, and you want to frame it with objects in the foreground, and this can give your image a feeling of depth, making it just a little bit more appealing than a classic snapshot. And there's a little example of framing, using the buildings as a way to frame our subjects. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. And what I'm saying here is that what you choose for a frame is going to vary, of course, depending on the scene. So in the image on the left, we have a boat framed by the trees. In the image on the right, we have the people framed really kind of only on one side by that overhanging tree, but a little bit by those shrubs coming in on the left. Mergers. This is something that instead of looking for inclusion in your picture, you're actually looking for exclusion from your picture. So here's an example. Dave, our very dated Dave here, our picture on the left, he's got this tree coming out of his head, or it looks like it's growing out. And when you're taking it, you probably don't even think about the tree in the background. And the reason for that is because we see things 3-dimensionally, but when they come out in a snapshot, they're 2-dimensional, and it looks as though that tree is growing out of his head. This would go back to simplicity. If we were working on simplicity anyway, we would probably not think that the picture on the left is a good picture of Dave. Instead, we want to neutralize that background so the picture on the right is a better picture. So again, look for plain backgrounds before you shoot your subject. Watch for color mergers as well. And what I mean by that is, so for example, if we take that picture on the right of Dave, if that were I'm going to back up a little bit. I think my camera froze, but I think I got cut off when we were talking about color mergers. So the last bullet point in our presentation. And so talking about color mergers, I was saying that if this shrub were brown, which would match Dave's jacket, we would be at real risk of there being a color merger where Dave would just blend into the background. So we really have to watch for that kind of stuff. Okay. Last one, point of view. There are a couple point of views that you can strive for. Worm's eye view would be that picture on the top, and a bird's eye view would be that picture on the bottom. So you can often dramatically change a picture by laying down on the ground and taking the picture looking up, or trying as best as you can to get above the action and take the picture looking down. As you can see from these pictures, especially that one on the top, there's a real dramatic shift in the energy of the picture because we've taken it from a different point of view. And those last 2 bullet points explain kind of that energy. So that picture on the top, definitely a very powerful, a very towering presence. And then the bottom, we try and create a sort of a diminished significance. Oh, sorry, not the last one. Fill the frame. Just as a landscape painter would try and not leave a portion of the canvas blank, don't ignore any portion of the scene as you look through your viewfinder, and make sure you're using the entire canvas for each picture. Okay? Use everything you have. Fill the frame. Okay? Either zoom as much as your lens will allow, or actually physically move yourself closer to the subject if that's possible. Compositions are very weak when the important subject is too small to see. And again, an example, very dynamic picture. Okay, let's wrap up by just taking a look at a couple examples. I'm going to show the picture, pause for a second while I want you to do some thinking about what rule of composition you think it is, and then I'll show you which rule of composition we're working on. So here's a first picture. I'm going to pause. I want you to be thinking. We got rule of thirds going on there. As our primary one, I think you could potentially argue leading lines as well. Another one. This one's probably a little easier. And of course, we've got framing as our rule of composition, making that a more dramatic picture. Another example. Hopefully in your mind, you thought leading lines. Maybe a little bit harder. Simplicity is probably the primary rule of composition, but I think you could also see a little bit of rule of thirds going on there. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. Hope you learned a little bit about the rules of composition today. I hope most importantly, the first time you go out on a photo assignment, you try and put these to use.